On October 14th, 2022, in the quiet suburb of Lakeview, Illinois, the body of Mark Hamilton, a 34-year-old sales manager at a local company, was discovered in his own home. A neighbor, Richard Barrett, called the police after noticing that Mark's house doors were open and his car was parked in the driveway, while Mark himself was not answering his phone. Upon arrival, the police found Mark dead in his office. His body was lying on the floor next to his desk, with signs of a struggle nearby. The cause of death, as confirmed by experts, was a stab wound to the chest. A knife was found nearby, bearing fingerprints that were sent for forensic examination. As the investigation began, Detective John Miller and his partner, Kate Riley, immediately focused on Mark Hamilton's close circle. It was clear from the outset that the murder had occurred in the home Mark and his wife, Sarah, had shared for the past 6 years. Sarah Hamilton, a 32-year-old housewife, who appeared shocked and distressed, was the first to be questioned. She claimed that at the time of the murder, she was visiting her parents, where she had stayed overnight. Sarah stated that her marriage to Mark was stable, although in recent months there had been some disagreements due to Mark's frequent business trips, which kept him away from home often. According to Sarah, Mark was very busy with work and had been spending more time away from home, which created tension in their relationship. Nevertheless, Sarah maintained that they were trying to resolve their issues peacefully, and she had no reason to suspect anything bad. The detectives carefully watched her reaction, noting every detail: her slow movements, frequent lip biting, and nervous glances toward the window. Mark's cousin, Andrew Hamilton, age 30, also came under the detective's scrutiny. Andrew was known for his close friendship with Mark, and they often spent time together discussing business, sports, or just having friendly conversations. He worked at an advertising agency downtown, where he had a good reputation and was considered a responsible employee. Andrew claimed that on the day of the murder, he was at work and returned home late, and his colleagues confirmed seeing him until the end of the workday. He noted that he had a good relationship with Mark and had no motive to kill his cousin. However, the detectives noticed that Andrew seemed nervous and changed his statements about the time he returned home several times. Sarah and Andrew turned out to be the only people who could have had access to Mark's house at any time and knew his daily routine. They were also the only ones who had been in close proximity to the victim in the days leading up to the murder. The detectives decided to dig deeper and find out whether Sarah and Andrew's alibis would hold up over time. The first thing that raised suspicion for Miller and Riley was that Sarah's mother, with whom she had supposedly stayed overnight, could not remember what time her daughter arrived. She recalled that Sarah had come over in the evening, but could not say for sure whether she had stayed the night. When the detectives asked if Sarah had left her parents' house during the night, Sarah's mother hesitated and said she had woken up in the middle of the night and did not see her daughter's car in the driveway. This immediately alerted the detectives. Sarah's alibi seemed shaky. Andrew, in turn, confidently stated that he had been at work all day and then went straight home. However, upon checking his alibi, it was discovered that his phone had been turned off for several hours after lunch. Moreover, surveillance cameras along the route to his home did not capture his car at the expected time. This also raised questions for the detectives. Why had Andrew turned off his phone? And why was his car not seen on the way home? The next step was to examine Sarah's and Andrew's phones. Detectives checked for any suspicious calls or messages. Sarah had not deleted her messages, but there were long chains of conversations with an unknown number, often in the late hours. When the detectives identified the number, it turned out to belong to Andrew. When asked why they were communicating so late, both replied that they had matters related to family issues. But their explanations seemed unconvincing, which only heightened suspicions. The detectives also learned that Mark and Sarah had visited a family therapist about 2 months ago. According to the therapist, Mark was concerned that Sarah was spending too much time with Andrew, and that their relationship seemed strange to him. The therapist also noted that Mark was suspicious and worried that something was wrong in his marriage, but he couldn't clearly articulate what it was. The detectives decided to look more closely into the connection between Andrew and Sarah. It turned out that in recent months they had frequently met in cafes and restaurants without Mark's presence. These meetings did not seem coincidental, and witness statements indicated they behaved like close companions. Moreover, one of Sarah's acquaintances reported seeing her with Andrew at a movie theater, where they appeared too close for mere relatives. Another important fact was also discovered 2 months ago. Mark had unexpectedly reduced his business trips, while Andrew, on the contrary, started staying late at work and disappearing from the office for several hours. All of this pointed to a possible hidden relationship between them, further casting doubt on their alibis. Now, the detectives had strong reasons to believe that there might have been more between Sarah and Andrew than just friendship or family ties, adding a new level of intrigue to the investigation and raising even more questions about the motives and possible reasons for Mark's murder. The investigation was becoming increasingly complicated. With each passing day, the detectives uncovered more discrepancies and contradictions in the testimonies of the main witnesses. Sarah's alibi, which initially seemed fairly reliable, was not as solid as it first appeared. Sarah's mother initially insisted that her daughter had arrived in the evening and spent several hours at their home. However, under repeated questioning, she admitted that Sarah had left the house around midnight, claiming she needed to return home to retrieve some forgotten medication. There was no evidence that Sarah had returned to her parents' house after midnight. Surveillance cameras on the road to her parents' house recorded Sarah's car traveling in both directions, once when she arrived and once when she left. However, the trail of her car disappeared after that. The route between her parents' house and her own home was full of gaps. This led the detectives to suspect that she might have stopped somewhere along the way, or even gone to Mark's house, which would completely break her alibi. Andrew also failed to provide a convincing explanation for his whereabouts on the day of the murder. Initially, he claimed he had been at work all day, but his colleagues confirmed his presence only until lunchtime. After that, his location remained unknown. When asked where he had been in the afternoon, Andrew responded evasively, nervously stuttering, and was unable to provide clear information. This raised the detectives' suspicions, as they believed the murder could have occurred during this time. Further suspicion arose from the fact that Andrew's phone was turned off during this period, which seemed like an attempt to hide his location. This contradicted his statement that he had been at work. Moreover, when his phone reappeared on the network, it was far from his office, as confirmed by cell tower data. Andrew claimed that he had lost his phone and found it later, but the detectives found this explanation lacking in credibility. Significant attention was also drawn to the results of the fingerprint analysis on the murder weapon, a kitchen knife found in Mark's office. Sarah's fingerprints were found on the knife handle, which initially seemed suspicious. However, their presence alone was not proof of her guilt, as the knife was a common kitchen item she could have used daily. Yet, the question arose of how the knife ended up in Mark's office. Such knives typically do not leave the kitchen, and according to Sarah, Mark rarely used kitchen utensils. Andrew, for his part, claimed he never entered the kitchen without permission, and his fingerprints were not found on the knife. This led the detectives to wonder who might have moved the knife to the office and why. Additionally, there was a minor mess in the house, as if someone had been searching for something. Several books had been pulled off the shelves, and Mark's desk drawers were left open. However, nothing valuable appeared to be missing. Sarah claimed she had not entered Mark's office on the day of the murder, and Andrew said he rarely visited the house without permission. But neither could explain who might have created the mess and for what purpose. Considering all these contradictions, the detectives began to suspect that Sarah and Andrew might be hiding much more than they were willing to admit. Each new piece of evidence and testimony only added to the mystery. The suspicion that the murder was not accidental, but carefully planned, grew stronger. The detectives continued to search Mark's house, hoping to find something that might shed light on what had happened. The discovery of a secret phone in the drawer of his desk was a significant breakthrough. The phone was simple, without internet or additional features, making it ideal for use in discreet communication. At first glance, the phone appeared almost empty, but the detectives soon noticed that most of the messages had been deleted, and the call log was erased. However, they were able to recover a few text messages. The messages on the phone were personal in nature and hinted that Mark had been involved in a secret affair. This was the first theory the detectives began to consider. Some of the messages included phrases like, "We need to talk before it's too late," and "I can't live like this anymore." Both messages clearly indicated a strained relationship, but also suggested some hidden drama. The question remained, who was this correspondence with? After requesting information from the cell phone provider, it was revealed that the number with which Mark had been corresponding belonged to Andrew Hamilton. This discovery was an unexpected twist in the investigation. It was hard to imagine that cousins would communicate through a secret phone. The detectives suspected that there might be a conflict between them, possibly related to money or family matters. However, the content of some of the messages seemed more personal and emotionally charged than one would expect from a business dispute. The detectives decided to analyze the messages between Mark and Andrew in detail. The texts were brief and restrained, but there was a clear undercurrent of hostility. For example, one of Mark's messages read, "You won't be able to hide this forever." Andrew's reply was equally cryptic. "I'm not going to explain my actions to you." These phrases could mean anything, from a financial dispute to something more personal. One of the most intriguing details was that a few days before the murder, Mark had sent Andrew a message saying, "We will meet at the house, and I want you to tell the truth." Considering that the phone was hidden, and the messages clearly hinted at a serious conflict, the detectives began to explore the possibility that Mark had discovered something about Andrew's secret life. Perhaps this secret had become the catalyst for their disagreement. When Sarah learned of the message's contents, her tone abruptly changed. She claimed that Mark was convinced Andrew had some sort of hidden relationship with one of his colleagues or acquaintances, but she herself did not know any details. Her behavior raised suspicions, as she initially claimed to know nothing about Mark's life outside their home. The detectives began to suspect that Sarah knew more than she was letting on. Her words were vague, and it seemed like she was trying to lead the investigation down a false trail. Checking this theory yielded no results. All of Andrew's colleagues and acquaintances confirmed they had no personal ties with him, and Andrew himself had no apparent motive for concealing such information. The detectives realized that Sarah might have been deliberately misleading them to hide her own motives. Or perhaps she was truly unaware, but intuitively felt there was more to the story. However, the new information about Mark's and Andrew's personal lives raised even more questions. Why was Mark communicating with Andrew through a secret phone? Why did Sarah, upon learning this, immediately assume a connection with someone in Andrew's circle if Andrew himself claimed to have no involvement with Mark or his affairs? The detectives understood that there were deep personal conflicts hidden in this story that remained outside the visible picture. At the same time, the detectives decided to examine other electronic devices belonging to Mark and Sarah for additional evidence. Particular attention was given to finding traces of deleted messages or files that might provide clues about the reasons for their quarrel with Andrew. A close examination of Sarah's browsing history and correspondence revealed several visits to websites about deleting digital traces, suggesting she might have been trying to hide something. As the detectives continued to analyze the data, they could not help but notice another strange detail. Sarah showed no interest in finding out the truth or in searching for the killer. Her behavior seemed more like an attempt to protect herself rather than clarify the truth. This made them wonder whether she had played a role in this conflict, perhaps a more significant one than was apparent at first glance. The detectives decided not to rush to conclusions. They understood that they needed more evidence to confirm their theory, so they placed Sarah and Andrew under 24-hour surveillance. At first glance, both behaved relatively calmly. Sarah tried to lead a normal life, returning to her daily activities, striving to remain confident and friendly, interacting with neighbors, and even resuming some of her usual tasks. However, it was clear that she avoided unnecessary conversations about the case and steered clear of any mention of Mark. Andrew, on the other hand, began to act secretively. He increasingly avoided meetings with colleagues, limited his phone calls, and appeared less frequently at his office. His meetings with friends also stopped, which looked suspicious. Surveillance also revealed that Andrew visited Sarah several times, though only for short periods. He spent just a few minutes at her house before quickly leaving, as if trying not to attract attention. Wiretapping played a significant role as well. Soon, the detectives began to hear fragments of their conversations, making it clear that Andrew and Sarah were still actively communicating, discussing some important matter related to the case. However, none of the conversations directly indicated their involvement in the murder. The detectives felt that things were not as simple as they seemed at first glance. The turning point came when the detectives decided to summon Sarah and Andrew for another round of questioning. The strategy was to interrogate them separately, but on the same day. They started with Andrew. He came to the police station displaying a calm exterior, but his behavior betrayed his tension. As the detectives asked more specific questions, Andrew began to get confused in his statements. His answers became increasingly vague and contradictory, and at one point, he made a mistake by stating that he was at home on the day of the murder, although he had previously claimed to have been in the office. When the detectives pressed Andrew, reminding him of his earlier statement, he hesitated and finally admitted that he hadn't told everything the first time. He confessed that he had feelings for Sarah that went beyond friendship. He also admitted that they had met while Mark was on business trips, but insisted that they had no plans to harm Mark. He claimed that their relationship was platonic and had nothing to do with the murder. Simultaneously, the detectives began their questioning of Sarah. She tried her best to remain composed, but her face clearly showed signs of worry. The detectives deliberately prolonged the conversation, asking the same questions from different angles. Sarah changed her statements several times about when and why she left her parents' house on the night of the murder. This also caused them to doubt her words. When the detectives presented her with copies of the recovered messages from Andrew's phone, Sarah hesitated for a moment. She realized that her relationship with Andrew had been exposed. She tried to downplay their connection as insignificant and emotionally confusing, insisting that they had no plans to harm Mark. However, the detectives already suspected that Mark had discovered their relationship and that this had led to tragic consequences. After analyzing all the evidence found, The detectives concluded that Sarah and Andrew had agreed to eliminate Mark after he uncovered their secret affair. They understood that if Mark decided to make this information public, the consequences would be devastating for both of them. Fearing that Mark would strip her of her status and property, Sarah told Andrew everything. Cornered and fearing exposure himself, Andrew suggested a solution: to get rid of Mark before he could do anything else. The key evidence was their phone communication and Andrew's testimony that Sarah had begged him to help get rid of Mark. The detectives had gathered enough evidence to prove that this was a premeditated murder, planned by both. Both suspects were arrested after several weeks of intense investigation. Sarah Hamilton and Andrew Hamilton were charged with the premeditated murder of Mark Hamilton. During interrogations, Sarah immediately began shifting all the blame onto Andrew. She claimed that he acted in a fit of jealousy, obsessed with the idea of being with her. Sarah insisted that she had tried to end their affair, but Andrew had threatened her and forced her to cooperate in Mark's murder. However, the evidence collected by the detectives told a different story. The messages recovered from Sarah's and Andrew's phones pointed to their joint actions and conspiracy. The correspondence clearly showed that they planned the murder together, discussing details and possible consequences. In one message, Andrew wrote, "This is our only way out," to which Sarah replied, "We need to do it quickly and leave no traces." These lines indicated that both were equally involved in the crime. Andrew, in turn, did not remain passive. He tried to portray himself as a victim of Sarah's manipulation, claiming that she had coerced him, threatening to expose their affair to his friends and family. According to Andrew, Sarah was supposedly afraid that Mark would uncover their relationship and insisted on getting rid of her husband. However, witness statements and the analysis of their correspondence confirmed that the initiative came from both sides. Ultimately, the court delivered its verdict. Both were found guilty of murder with premeditation and conspiracy. In his statement, the judge emphasized that the crime was carefully planned and executed with particular cruelty, leaving no choice but to sentence both to long prison terms. Sarah received 25 years without the possibility of parole, while Andrew was sentenced to 20 years for his complicity. Thank you for watching the video till the end. Even more gripping stories about real crimes are waiting for you on our channel. Subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.